This happened 4 months ago, but I'm only now able to write about it without feeling like I'm going to shatter into a million pieces. I don't know if sharing my story will help anyone else, but maybe putting it into words will help me process the final pieces of what happened. It was a Sunday afternoon in early March, and I was finally getting around to organizing our Costa Rica vacation photos from January. My husband Daniel and I had spent 2 weeks exploring rainforests, relaxing on beaches, and celebrating our 5th wedding anniversary. It had been perfect, a much-needed break from Chicago's brutal winter and our demanding work schedules. I was curled up on our sofa, laptop balanced on my knees, sorting through hundreds of images in our shared Google Photos account. Daniel was at the gym, giving me a few hours of peaceful productivity. As I created a new album for the trip, Google's helpful algorithm did what it always does, suggested similar photos we might want to include. That's when I saw them. Among the thumbnails of suggested images was a photo that made no sense. Daniel sitting at a candlelit restaurant table I didn't recognize, raising a wine glass toward the camera. The preview was small, but I could clearly see it wasn't from our Costa Rica trip. In fact, I couldn't place it from any vacation we'd taken together. Curiosity rather than suspicion prompted me to click on it. The enlarged image loaded and my stomach instantly dropped. Daniel was indeed at a romantic dinner, but I wasn't the one taking the photo. Based on the angle, someone sitting across from him had captured the moment. A woman's manicured hand was visible at the edge of the frame, holding a matching wine glass and a toast. The location tag read Barcelona, Spain, with a date from this past February, just 6 weeks after our Costa Rica trip. A business trip Daniel had taken alone. With growing unease, I scrolled through the album this photo belonged to. There were dozens of images from Barcelona, stunning architecture, tourist attractions, scenic viewpoints. And in many of them, Daniel appeared with a woman I recognized as Melissa, his 26-year-old administrative assistant. There they were outside the Sagrada Familia, arms around each other's waists. At Park Güell, her head resting on his shoulder. In a dimly lit cocktail bar, sitting much closer than colleagues should. And most damning of all, a selfie of them in what was clearly a hotel room, rumpled sheets visible in the background, Daniel pressing a kiss to her temple while she smiled radiantly at the camera. This wasn't a business trip with a colleague tagging along. This was a romantic getaway with his assistant, disguised as a work obligation. My hands began to shake so badly that my laptop nearly slid off my knees. A wave of nausea forced me to set it aside and rush to the bathroom, where I vomited until there was nothing left but painful dry heaves. Bracing myself against the cool porcelain of the sink, I stared at my reflection, face ghostly pale, eyes wide with shock, a stranger looking back at me trying to process how her life had just imploded. Questions flooded my mind in a relentless torrent. How long had this been going on? Was Barcelona their first trip together, or just the first I'd discovered? Did anyone at his company know? Had our friends seen signs I'd missed? Was I the only one who hadn't realized my husband was having an affair with his assistant? But the question that kept circling back, that made my chest physically ache with each heartbeat, how could he have taken her to Barcelona? Barcelona had been our dream destination for years. We'd been saving specifically for that trip, planning to go for our 6th anniversary. I had a folder filled with research about the best neighborhoods, restaurants off the tourist path, hidden architectural gems. We would practice Spanish together while cooking dinner, promising, next year, we'll be ordering this in Barcelona. He had taken my dream and given it to another woman. I returned to the laptop with legs that felt disconnected from my body, moving through a thick fog of disbelief. With methodical precision born of emotional shock, I began taking screenshots of the Barcelona album, saving them to a separate folder on my personal drive. The detached part of my brain, the part not currently screaming in pain, recognized I needed evidence that couldn't be deleted with a few clicks. As I documented the betrayal, I noticed something else. The Barcelona photos were stored in a hidden folder that didn't appear in our main shared photo stream. I only had access because they were automatically backed up to the same Google account where we stored family photos. Daniel had attempted to keep them separate but hadn't understood the nuances of cloud storage permissions. A technological glitch had revealed what might otherwise have remained hidden for months or years. Once I had secured the evidence, another thought struck me with paralyzing force. Daniel would be home from the gym within the hour. I would have to look into the eyes of the man I had built a life with and somehow acknowledge that our reality had been fundamentally altered by what I had discovered. Should I confront him immediately, plan a more calculated approach, pretend I knew nothing while gathering more information? The tactical questions felt surreal against the backdrop of emotional devastation. I heard the garage door opener activate, the mechanical whir announcing Daniel's return much earlier than expected. My decision timeframe collapsed from an hour to mere seconds. Taking a deep breath, I reopened the Barcelona album on the laptop screen, leaving it displayed on the coffee table. Then I sat back on the sofa, hands clasped tightly in my lap to control their trembling, and waited for my husband to walk through the door and face what he had done. To understand the magnitude of this betrayal, you need to know what Daniel and I had built together, the foundation that was now cracking beneath my feet. We met 7 years ago at a mutual friend's housewarming party. I was 22, fresh out of college and working at my first real job in marketing. Daniel was 26, already established in his finance career and exuding the quiet confidence I found irresistible. We bonded over shared music interests and a mutual love of travel documentaries, exchanging numbers at the end of the evening with promises to meet up at a concert the following weekend. Our relationship developed with an ease that made me believe in concepts like compatibility and meant to be. We moved in together after a year, got engaged 6 months later, and married in a small ceremony surrounded by our closest friends and family. There were no red flags, no periods of uncertainty, just a steady progression toward building a life with someone I genuinely considered my best friend and partner. Daniel supported my career ambitions without hesitation, celebrating each promotion and encouraging me through professional challenges. I cheered his successes and provided a sounding board for work frustrations. We approached major decisions as a team, from purchasing our condo to mapping out 5-year plans that included eventual parenthood once our careers were more established. We weren't perfect, no couple is. We had occasional arguments about household responsibilities, differing approaches to financial planning, and the typical friction of two independent people sharing a life. But we had always addressed conflicts directly, finding compromises that left neither of us feeling consistently overlooked or undervalued. Our sex life had remained satisfying even after 5 years of marriage, perhaps less spontaneous than in the early days, but still characterized by genuine connection and mutual pleasure. We still had regular date nights, surprised each other with thoughtful gestures, and maintained intimate rituals like Sunday morning coffee in bed while planning the week ahead. When Daniel's company promoted him to a position requiring more travel, we had an honest discussion about how to maintain our connection during separations. We established daily video calls, shared digital photo albums of our respective days, and planned special reconnection time after each trip. I had believed these practices reflected mutual commitment to nurturing our relationship despite geographical distance. The Barcelona photos shattered that belief completely. Those daily video calls during his business trip, him showing me bland hotel meeting rooms and telling me how much he missed me, had been performed between romantic excursions with Melissa. The photos he shared of conference venues and networking dinners had been carefully curated to exclude evidence of her presence. Even our emotional reunion when he returned, including the passionate lovemaking I had interpreted as testament to how much he had missed me, was tainted by the realization that he had been sharing another woman's bed just hours earlier. I had never suspected infidelity because I had never had reason to. Daniel didn't manifest the typical signs: no unexplained absences, no emotional withdrawal, no significant changes in physical intimacy, no sudden possessiveness about his phone. Or perhaps those signs had been there, masked by the business travel that provided perfect cover for his duplicity. Melissa had been hired about 18 months ago. I had met her several times at company functions, finding her professional and pleasant if somewhat reserved around me. Daniel mentioned her occasionally in work stories, always in appropriate contexts of administrative support and office management. There had been no obvious flirtation, no tension I could detect, certainly nothing suggesting romantic or sexual interest. In fact, Daniel had presented himself as a mentor figure in her professional development, explaining his occasional after-hours meetings with her as opportunities to advise her about career advancement. I had actually admired his willingness to support a young woman navigating the male-dominated finance industry. The irony of that admiration now felt like acid in my throat. Our Costa Rica anniversary trip, just weeks before the Barcelona photos, had seemed idyllic. We had disconnected from work, reconnected with each other, and even had emotional conversations about starting a family within the next year. Daniel had held my hand across a beachside dinner table and said, "The only thing that could make my life more complete would be creating a family with you." Had he already been involved with Melissa then? Had those tender moments been genuine, or was he already compartmentalizing between two relationships? Was the entire anniversary trip a performance designed to allay any potential suspicions before his romantic getaway with her? These questions pounded in my head as I heard Daniel's key in the door, his gym bag hitting the floor in the entryway, his voice calling out my name with the casual warmth of a husband returning to a wife whose world hasn't just collapsed. "Eliza, I'm back early. Johnson canceled our racquetball game." He stopped abruptly as he entered the living room, his eyes moving from my face to the laptop screen displaying the Barcelona photos. The transition in his expression would have been fascinating if it wasn't devastating. Confusion to recognition to panic in the span of seconds. "Eliza," he said again, my name now carrying an entirely different weight. "I can explain." Those three words, the classic opening line of cheaters throughout history, triggered something primal inside me. The shock that had kept me relatively calm shattered, releasing a flood of raw emotion too powerful to contain. "Explain?" I repeated, my voice unrecognizable even to myself. "Explain taking your assistant to Barcelona, the trip we've been planning for years. Explain making romantic memories in my dream destination with another woman. Please, Daniel, explain how any of this could possibly make sense." He took a step toward me, hands raised in that placating gesture people use with explosive situations or dangerous animals. I stood, backing away from his approach, unwilling to be touched by hands that had so recently held another woman. "It's not what it looks like," he tried again, another cliche that only fueled my growing rage. "Really? Because it looks like you took your 26-year-old assistant on a romantic vacation while telling me you were at a business conference. It looks like you've been having an affair while I've been planning our future, researching fertility options, believing we had a faithful marriage." His face crumpled, the facade of control dissolving. "Please, just let me explain. It's complicated. Melissa and I—" "Don't say her name in our home," I interrupted, unexpected jealousy flaring at the intimate way her name sounded on his lips. "I don't want to hear about your feelings for her or how special she is or how it just happened. I want to know how long you've been lying to me and why you're still here pretending to be a faithful husband when clearly you've moved on." The confrontation that followed revealed fragments of truth embedded in carefully crafted explanations. According to Daniel, the relationship with Melissa had begun 3 months earlier, developing from late work sessions and professional admiration into an emotional connection and eventually physical intimacy. The Barcelona trip had been arranged through his company for legitimate business purposes, but he had invited her along, covering her expenses personally and fabricating a schedule that allowed for romantic interludes between actual work obligations. "I was confused," he insisted. "I care deeply for both of you. I've been trying to figure out what I want, what's right for everyone involved." "While lying to my face every single day," I pointed out. "While making love to me after being with her, while discussing having children together. That's not confusion, Daniel, that's calculated deception." As our confrontation continued, one particularly painful detail emerged. Melissa knew all about me, about our marriage, about our future plans. Unlike many affairs where the other woman is kept in the dark about the full extent of existing commitments, Daniel had been entirely transparent with her while systematically deceiving me. She understands the complexity of the situation, he explained, as if this somehow mitigated the betrayal. She knows I need time to figure things out. While I knew nothing, I replied, I was the only one not granted the dignity of making informed choices about my own life. By evening, the initial confrontation had exhausted itself, leaving us in a strange limbo of acknowledged betrayal without clear next steps. Daniel offered to stay with a friend, which I accepted with empty gratitude. As he packed an overnight bag, moving around our bedroom with awkward unfamiliarity, I sat in the living room staring at the evidence still displayed on my laptop screen. The woman I had been that morning, contentedly organizing vacation photos, secure in her marriage, planning for a future that seemed certain, no longer existed. In her place was someone I didn't yet recognize, facing a landscape of decisions I had never anticipated having to make. After Daniel left, the apartment felt simultaneously suffocating and emptied of oxygen. I moved through the rooms like a ghost, touching objects that connected us, wedding photos, travel souvenirs, the coffee mugs we had purchased as a set. Each item now carried a question mark. Would this stay with me? With him? Be discarded entirely? I couldn't sleep that night, my mind cycling through memories and recalibrating them with new context. Had that business dinner in December actually involved Melissa? When he stepped away to take phone calls during our movie nights, had he been texting her? Were the colleagues who supposedly joined them for weekend work sessions even real? Morning brought the sharp clarity that sometimes follows emotional upheaval. I needed more information, not for reconciliation purposes, but to make informed decisions about my next steps. The Barcelona photos had revealed the affair, but not its full scope or implications for my life going forward. I called in sick to work, then began a methodical investigation of our digital and financial lives. What I discovered stunned me with its comprehensiveness. Daniel's deception extended far beyond Barcelona. Credit card statements revealed hotel charges in our own city on evenings he had claimed to be working late. Their relationship had physically begun not 3 months ago, as he claimed, but at least 7 months earlier based on dinner receipts and room service charges. Text message records from our shared phone plan showed thousands of exchanges with Melissa's number, including during our Costa Rica anniversary trip. He had been messaging her from the bathroom of our beach villa while I slept a few feet away. Email records contained flight inquiries for future trips, including Paris in June, supposedly another business conference, but with adjacent days blocked for personal time. He had been actively planning their next romantic getaway, while I researched fertility clinics for the family we had discussed creating. Most disturbing was a draft email I found in his rarely used personal account, addressed to me but never sent. In it, he outlined a separation, citing growing apart and different life goals, a manufactured narrative that didn't mention Melissa at all. He had been crafting his exit strategy, preparing to rewrite our history in terms that absolved him of betrayal. By midday, I had compiled a comprehensive timeline of his affair alongside our major relationship moments, creating a nauseating contrast between what I had experienced and what had actually been happening. August, 7 months ago. First hotel charge coinciding with Daniel's late work meeting. September, weekend business trip where location data showed him nowhere near the conference venue. October, our conversation about starting a family within the year. November, multiple dinner charges for 2 at restaurants across town. December, first appearance of jewelry purchase not given to me. January, our Costa Rica anniversary trip, overlapping with 121 text messages to Melissa. February, Barcelona trip documented in the photos. March, discovery of the affair. The pattern revealed something beyond physical infidelity. This was methodical compartmentalization, maintaining our marriage while simultaneously building a parallel relationship, with deliberate planning for an eventual transition that would have left me blindsided and questioning where things had gone wrong. Around 2 p.m., my phone rang with a call from a number I didn't recognize. I answered cautiously. "Eliza, this is Melissa Anderson." My hand tightened around the phone so severely I'm surprised it didn't crack. The voice was professional, slightly hesitant, but not apologetic. "I think we should talk," she continued when I didn't immediately respond. "Daniel told me what happened with the photos." The surreal nature of the call momentarily stunned me into silence. The woman who had been sleeping with my husband was reaching out as if arranging a business meeting. "There's nothing to discuss," I finally managed. "Whatever relationship you have with my husband is between you two. I'm not interested in a civilized chat about sharing him." "That's not why I'm calling," she replied, her tone shifting slightly. "Daniel hasn't been completely honest with either of us, and I thought you deserved to know that." This caught my attention despite my resolve to end the call. "What do you mean?" "He told me your marriage was essentially over before we got involved, that you were staying together for appearances while living separate lives, that you had both acknowledged you wanted different futures." The calculated nature of Daniel's lies took my breath away. He had created entirely different narratives for each of us, tailored to enable his dual relationships. "None of that is true," I said when I could speak again. "We were actively planning to start a family. We just spent 2 weeks in Costa Rica celebrating our anniversary. There were no discussions about separation or different life goals." Her sharp intake of breath was audible through the phone. "He told me the Costa Rica trip was a long-standing obligation you felt compelled to fulfill for family appearances. He said you slept in separate beds." "We did not," I stated flatly, memories of passionate vacation lovemaking making me physically ill in retrospect. "I think," Melissa said after a moment, "we've both been manipulated in different ways." Her voice had lost its professional edge, revealing someone much younger and perhaps equally destabilized. The conversation that followed was one of the strangest of my life, comparing Daniel's contradictory statements, identifying patterns of deception that had enabled him to maintain relationships with both of us, discovering that he had used identical romantic gestures, and even repeated unique phrases we had each believed were special to our respective relationships. "He has a reservation at Bellissimo for my birthday next week," Melissa mentioned at one point. "He said it's a special restaurant he's never taken anyone else to." "We celebrated our anniversary there 2 years ago," I replied, another piece of uniqueness transforming into evidence of recycled romance. By the end of the hour-long call, a peculiar solidarity had formed between us. Not friendship, certainly, but mutual recognition of having been played by the same man using identical methods for different audiences. "What will you do now?" Melissa asked as the conversation wound down. "I don't know yet," I answered honestly. "But I'll be making decisions based on complete information rather than the partial truth Daniel has been controlling." "Me too," she said quietly before ending the call. That evening, Daniel texted asking if he could come home to talk, suggesting we work through this difficult situation together. The presumption that reconciliation was the default outcome, that he simply needed to manage my reaction rather than face consequences, crystallized something within me. I replied with a single word, "No." Then I contacted a divorce attorney and scheduled a consultation for the following morning. The pragmatic steps of securing my financial resources, documenting the affair evidence, and understanding my legal options provided structure amid emotional chaos. The attorney, a woman in her 50s with a compassionate but no-nonsense approach, outlined clear next steps while acknowledging the personal devastation behind the practical matters. Many clients find themselves questioning their entire reality after discovering deception of this magnitude, she observed. That's a normal response to abnormal behavior by someone you trusted completely. Her validation of my psychological experience alongside practical guidance created space for both aspects of my situation, the logistical dismantling of a marriage and the emotional processing of betrayal, to coexist without one overwhelming the other. Armed with legal guidance and the comprehensive evidence I had gathered, I felt equipped to face Daniel's inevitable attempts at narrative control. What I couldn't yet address was the deeper wound. How to trust my own perceptions again when the relationship I had believed solid had been an elaborate construction of half-truths and calculated omissions. 2 days after discovering the Barcelona photos, I agreed to meet Daniel at a neutral location, a quiet cafe equidistant from our apartment and his friend's place where he had been staying. The tactical advantages were clear. public enough to discourage extreme emotional displays, private enough for necessary candor, and time-limited by the cafe's operating hours. I arrived 15 minutes early, selecting a corner table that allowed me to see him enter while providing some acoustic privacy from other patrons. I had dressed carefully in what my friend Leah called my corporate warrior outfit, the structured blazer and tailored pants I wore to high-stakes client meetings, armor of a sort. Daniel appeared exactly on time, unshaven and visibly fatigued, carrying a manila envelope that immediately triggered my suspicion. We had negotiated ground rules for this meeting via text. Open conversation focused on facts rather than emotions, no physical contact, and absolute honesty regardless of discomfort. "Thank you for meeting me," he began after ordering coffee neither of us would touch. "I've been doing a lot of thinking about everything." "I've been doing a lot of investigating," I countered, establishing immediately that this wouldn't be a conversation controlled by his perspective. "So before you continue, you should know that I'm aware the affair began at least 7 months ago, not 3 as you claimed. I know about the hotels here in Chicago, the text messages during our anniversary trip, and the plans for Paris in June." His expression shifted from practiced contrition to genuine alarm. "You've been going through my personal information?" The attempt to reframe his betrayal as my invasion of privacy might have worked days earlier. Now it struck me as almost comically transparent. "I've been discovering the truth you deliberately concealed from me," I corrected. "As is my right when my husband is living a double life that directly impacts my health, my future, and my ability to make informed decisions about my own life." This established the pattern for our 2-hour conversation, Daniel attempting to control the narrative, me redirecting with documented facts that contradicted his selective presentation of reality. The manila envelope, as I had suspected, contained a proposed separation agreement already drafted by his attorney, presenting terms that heavily favored his financial interests while offering superficial generosity about household items. "You've been busy," I observed, deliberately not touching the document, "planning your exit strategy just like you planned those trips with Melissa." "I'm trying to make this transition as painless as possible," he insisted, "to give us both the fresh start we need." "Transition? Fresh start? Such careful language," I noted. "You're still avoiding the actual terms for what happened. Affair, betrayal, infidelity, deception." "Those words don't help us move forward constructively," he argued. "They're accurate descriptions of what occurred," I countered. "And moving forward constructively requires acknowledging reality rather than repackaging it in comfortable euphemisms." As the conversation continued, I maintained a composure that surprised even me, presenting evidence-based questions that dismantled his attempts at minimization. When he claimed the Barcelona trip had been an impulsive deviation, I referenced the hotel reservation made 2 months earlier. When he suggested our marriage had been showing signs of strain that contributed to his susceptibility to an affair, I quoted his own email from January describing our relationship as the most fulfilling partnership imaginable. The pivotal moment came when I placed my own envelope on the table, containing copies of the most significant evidence I had gathered, including my timeline of his activities alongside our major relationship milestones. "I've already consulted an attorney," I informed him. "I've documented the timeline of the affair, the financial resources used to conduct it, and the deliberate deception involved. I'm not signing your separation agreement. My lawyer will be contacting yours to negotiate terms that reflect the actual circumstances of our marriage's end." For the first time, genuine fear flickered across his face, not of losing me, but of losing control of the situation. His carefully constructed exit strategy was collapsing in real time. "You've spoken with Melissa," he said suddenly, a statement rather than a question. "Yes." "What did she tell you?" "The truth you didn't," I replied simply. "She believed our marriage was already effectively over before your relationship began. She thought we were maintaining appearances while living separate lives. She didn't know we were actively planning to start a family." Color drained from his face. "Eliza, you have to understand." "I don't have to understand anything," I interrupted, a controlled intensity in my voice that stopped him mid-sentence. I don't have to empathize with your confusion or appreciate the difficult position you created for yourself. I don't have to forgive you to move forward with my life. The only thing I have to do is make decisions based on complete information rather than the edited version you've been presenting. What do you want? He asked finally, deflating visibly as his narratives continued to crumble. A divorce that acknowledges the infidelity rather than pretending we grew apart. Financial settlements that reflect the resources you diverted to conduct your affair. And most importantly, the dignity of my own truth rather than the story you've been crafting to justify your choices. When he attempted one final emotional appeal, referencing our history, the love we had shared, the possibility of working through this breach of trust, I found myself experiencing an unexpected clarity. Here's what I've realized, Daniel. The man I loved, the marriage I valued, those existed primarily in my understanding of our relationship, which I now know was based on carefully managed information. I've been loving a curated version of you, not the full reality. That doesn't mean those feelings weren't real for me, but it does mean the foundation they were built on wasn't solid. I stood, gathering my belongings with deliberate calm. My lawyer will contact yours. Please don't come to the apartment unless we've arranged it in advance. I'll have your essential items packed for collection by the end of the week. As I walked away, he called after me. This isn't who we are, Eliza. This cold legal approach, it doesn't reflect who we've been to each other. I turned back briefly. You forfeited the right to definitions when you started living by different ones with different women. I'm defining things for myself now. The cafe door closed behind me with a gentle chime that belied the finality of the moment. In my car, hands gripping the steering wheel, I finally allowed the tears that had been building behind my composed facade. Not for the marriage I was losing, but for the one I had believed in that had never actually existed. The initial weeks following discovery and confrontation operated according to a strange physics, time simultaneously dragging and accelerating, emotions swinging between numbing detachment and overwhelming intensity. I moved through necessary tasks with robotic precision while struggling to perform basic self-care. Friends and family mobilized around me with varying degrees of helpfulness. My parents, who lived 2 states away, offered to come stay, but respected my request for space to process independently first. My younger sister, Elena, flew in for a long weekend, helping me rearrange the apartment to eliminate configurations that triggered specific memories with Daniel. My closest friends organized a schedule, ensuring I wasn't alone during critical periods, evenings, weekends, the day Daniel came to collect his belongings while I stayed at a hotel to avoid contact. They brought meals when I couldn't motivate myself to cook, accompanied me to legal consultations when anxiety peaked, and provided distraction when rumination threatened to overwhelm me. The physical manifestations of emotional trauma surprised me with their intensity and persistence. Insomnia transformed my nights into endless thought spirals, analyzing past moments for signs I had missed or ignored. Appetite disappeared completely, then returned with voracious intensity, creating unpredictable eating patterns that left me feeling disconnected from basic bodily functions. Concentration fractured so severely that reading work emails required multiple attempts to comprehend simple requests. Most disturbing was the constant hypervigilance, a persistent feeling that additional revelations lurked around every corner, that other aspects of my reality might suddenly be exposed as carefully constructed fictions. This anxiety extended beyond my relationship with Daniel to other areas of life, creating irrational suspicions about friendships, professional relationships, and family dynamics that had previously felt secure. You're experiencing betrayal trauma, my therapist explained during one of our twice-weekly sessions. The deception hasn't just damaged your trust in Daniel, it's temporarily impaired your trust in your own perceptions. Your brain is working overtime to identify threats and verify information because its previous assessment of reality proved fundamentally flawed. This framework helped me understand my psychological symptoms without pathologizing them. I wasn't overreacting or losing my mind. I was having normal responses to abnormal circumstances, to discovering that someone I had trusted implicitly had been systematically manipulating my understanding of our shared reality. The divorce proceedings advanced with sterile efficiency. Daniel's initial attempts at advantageous terms quickly abandoned when faced with the comprehensive evidence I had gathered. My attorney, calm, methodical Catherine with 20 years' experience in high-conflict divorces, proved remarkably effective at separating emotional content from legal strategy, keeping negotiations focused on equitable division of assets rather than litigating relationship dynamics. Mutual friends navigated the dissolution of our social unit with varying degrees of grace. Some maintained relationships with both of us through careful scheduling and topic management. Others chose sides explicitly, either rallying around my experience of betrayal or accepting Daniel's revised narrative of a relationship that had naturally degraded before he pursued connection elsewhere. Most painful were the revelations of friends who had suspected something between Daniel and Melissa, but hadn't shared their concerns with me. They seemed too comfortable together at the holiday party, my friend Jess admitted when I confronted her directly. The way they communicated without words, anticipated each other's movements, but it was just a feeling, nothing concrete I could point to without seeming paranoid. I noticed him texting under the table when we had dinner in November, another friend confessed. He was smiling at his phone in a way that seemed off, but I told myself I was projecting because of my ex's similar behavior. These admissions created a secondary layer of betrayal, not malicious but nevertheless impactful. The collective silence of people who had noticed concerning patterns but chosen not to voice them had contributed to my isolation in the weeks before discovery. While I understood their hesitation to raise alarms without definitive evidence, their revelations reinforced how thoroughly I had been kept in the dark, while others at least glimpsed fragments of the truth. 6 weeks after discovery, the practical dismantling of our marriage was largely complete. Legal documents were finalized, financial accounts separated, personal property divided and relocated. Daniel had moved permanently into a downtown apartment, convenient to both his office and Melissa's, though rumors suggested their relationship had grown increasingly strained following the exposure of his parallel deceptions. The emotional dismantling proved far more complex and non-linear. Moments of emerging strength would suddenly collapse into fresh grief triggered by unexpected associations. The scent of Daniel's preferred coffee in a cafe, a song that had accompanied a significant relationship memory, the automatic reaching for my phone to share an observation with someone who was no longer my primary connection. 2 months after discovery, I experienced what my therapist identified as an important transition in the grief process. While sorting through a storage closet, I found a sweatshirt of Daniel's that had been missed during the property division. My initial reaction was the familiar clutch of pain and anger, but as I held the garment, a different response emerged. Not the passionate emotional charge of early grief, but a duller recognition of something that no longer held significant meaning. I placed the sweatshirt in a donation bag without the ritualistic aspect that had accompanied earlier separations from shared items. It was simply a piece of clothing that no longer belonged in my space, not a symbol requiring ceremonial processing. That's progress, my therapist noted when I described the incident. Not because you're over it, but because the emotional intensity is beginning to moderate into something more sustainable. The betrayal is transforming from acute crisis to integrated experience. This subtle shift represented the beginning of a new phase in recovery, one where Daniel and his actions gradually occupied less psychological space in my daily life, where my emotional responses became less reactive and more reflective, where I could begin envisioning a future defined by possibilities rather than loss. 3 months after discovery, I made 2 significant decisions that symbolized this evolution. First, I accepted a professional development opportunity I had previously declined due to its potential impact on family planning timelines, a 2-month international assignment that would lay groundwork for potential promotion. Second, I initiated the process of selling the apartment that had been our shared home, recognizing that true healing might require physical as well as emotional relocation. Both decisions represented reclamation of agency over my life trajectory, choices made independently based on my priorities, rather than compromises within a partnership that had proven fundamentally compromised. The international assignment offered both professional advancement and geographical distance during the final stages of divorce proceedings. The property sale would provide financial resources for establishing a new home environment without lingering associations. As arrangements for both transitions progressed, I experienced an unexpected emotional liberation, a sense of possibility that had been absent in the immediate aftermath of discovery. While the betrayal remained a significant life event that had fundamentally altered my understanding of the previous 7 years, it was gradually being recontextualized as a painful chapter rather than the defining narrative of my life story. 4 months after discovery, with 1 week remaining before my international assignment began, I received a text message from Melissa. "I thought you should know that Daniel and I are no longer together. His patterns didn't change. Take care of yourself." The message carried no explanation beyond those 3 sentences, but required none. The man who had systematically deceived his wife had unsurprisingly continued similar behavior patterns with his girlfriend. The parallel relationship built during his marriage had collapsed under the weight of its inherently unstable foundation. I felt no vindication or satisfaction at this information, only a distant sadness for all 3 people caught in a destructive dynamic created primarily by one person's choices. After brief consideration, I replied with simple acknowledgement. "Thank you for letting me know. I hope you find healing too." Later that week, as moving boxes accumulated in preparation for both my temporary international relocation and the permanent sale of the apartment, I received an email from Daniel. Unlike his previous communications, alternating between practical divorce matters and emotional appeals for understanding, this message struck a different tone. "I don't expect forgiveness or even a response. I just need to acknowledge that my choices cause profound harm that no explanation or justification can mitigate." The stories I told myself about my behavior were just that, stories designed to allow me to continue actions I knew were wrong. You deserve truth, respect, and loyalty. I failed to provide those fundamental elements. I am seeking professional help to understand why I created such destruction, and to ensure I never repeat these patterns. I am deeply sorry for the pain I caused you. I read the message twice, noting both its apparent sincerity and its careful avoidance of implicit requests for absolution or renewed connection. Whether this represented genuine accountability or another calculated performance was ultimately irrelevant to my healing process. I filed the email without responding, neither accepting nor rejecting the apology it contained, simply acknowledging its existence without allowing it to significantly impact my forward momentum. The apartment sold quickly in a favorable market, closing scheduled for shortly after my return from the international assignment. The coincidental timing created a clean transition timeline, 2 months abroad, followed by settlement on the property sale, leading directly to establishing a new residence in a different neighborhood. The practical logistics of change provided structure for the less tangible emotional evolution happening simultaneously. As I completed final packing before departure, I found myself surrounded by carefully labeled boxes representing different aspects of my life, some containing shared history that required continued processing, others holding elements of identity independent of the relationship that had ended. The physical sorting paralleled the psychological work of determining what to carry forward and what to leave behind as I moved into an uncharted future. The international assignment in Singapore provided exactly the reset my recovery process needed. Immersed in challenging professional responsibilities and navigating an unfamiliar cultural context, I experienced my first sustained periods of not thinking about the betrayal or its aftermath. 14-hour workdays followed by exploration of a vibrant city created natural boundaries around rumination, while the 12-hour time difference from Chicago limited practical engagement with divorce finalizations to specific scheduled windows. My temporary apartment, a sleek, minimalist space overlooking the harbor, contained no triggers or associations with my former life. The anonymity of being a foreigner granted freedom from concerned inquiries or expectations of particular emotional responses. Colleagues knew me only as I presented myself in the current moment, without reference to my history or recent trauma. This is the first place where I'm not Eliza who's going through that terrible divorce, I told my therapist during one of our weekly video sessions. Here I'm just Eliza, the marketing strategist from Chicago. It's uncomfortable sometimes, but also liberating. New environments can provide valuable perspective, she observed. Distance, both geographical and psychological, often reveals which aspects of our emotional responses are tied to external triggers versus internal processing. This distinction proved increasingly relevant as I established routines in Singapore that bore no relationship to my previous life patterns. The absence of familiar cues created space to experience emotions without automatic contextual framing. Sadness, anger, or anxiety could emerge without immediate attribution to the betrayal, requiring more nuanced identification of current triggers versus historical associations. 6 weeks into the assignment, I experienced a significant breakthrough during a weekend exploration of a nearby island. Sitting on a secluded beach watching the sunset, I realized several hours had passed without a single thought of Daniel, the divorce, or my previous life trajectory. This wasn't the result of deliberate distraction, but genuine absorption in present experience, a state of natural engagement rather than constructed diversion. The moment didn't represent completion of the healing process, but it demonstrated capacity for authentic presence, unfiltered through the lens of betrayal. The ability to fully occupy current experience without reference to past injury signified emerging integration rather than continuing fragmentation. When the assignment concluded after 8 weeks, I returned to Chicago with both professional accomplishments and personal evolution that exceeded my initial expectations. The consulting team had delivered exceptional results for our international client, with my contributions specifically highlighted in final assessments. My recovery journey had progressed from acute crisis management to meaningful reconstruction of identity and perspective. The Chicago I returned to matched my internal transformation, familiar yet fundamentally altered. The season had changed during my absence, summer heat giving way to early autumn crispness. The apartment I had shared with Daniel was now officially transferred to new owners. Friends who had provided intensive support during the initial aftermath had adjusted to less frequent but more normalized interactions. With the property sale completed, I faced the practical question of where to establish my new home. Rather than rushing this decision, I opted for a short-term furnished rental in a neighborhood I had always appreciated but never lived in, giving myself 3 months to thoughtfully evaluate options without pressure or artificial deadlines. This transitional space became a laboratory for exploring preferences independent of compromises developed during partnership. I discovered genuine interest in architectural details I had previously accepted as Daniel's domain. I established different patterns for everyday activities from grocery shopping to exercise routines. I experimented with home decor elements that would have clashed with his minimalist aesthetic. I'm rediscovering aspects of myself that I adapted or set aside without really noticing, I explained to my sister Elena during her visit. Not in dramatic ways, but in those small daily choices that gradually shape how you move through the world. That's how relationships work, she observed. We all adjust and compromise. The question is whether those adaptations feel like natural evolution or self-suppression. This framing helped me evaluate my marriage with more nuance than the absolute categories of authentic versus inauthentic that had dominated early processing. Many of the adaptations I had made were normal relationship accommodations rather than fundamental betrayals of self. The problem wasn't the compromises themselves, but the unequal commitment to shared reality that underpinned them. 6 months after discovery, the legal aspects of divorce were completely finalized. The dissolution that had initially seemed catastrophically disruptive had resolved into structured separation with clear boundaries and limited ongoing entanglements. Without children or complex business interests connecting us, Daniel and I could theoretically proceed without further interaction beyond occasional tax-related communications for the next 2 years. My professional trajectory continued its positive evolution, the international assignment leading to expanded responsibilities and recognition that might have been complicated by family planning considerations in my previous life configuration. While I had genuinely desired children within my marriage, I now recognize the flexibility of that timeline outside the arbitrary deadlines we had established together. The biological clock is real, my doctor acknowledged during my annual checkup, but not nearly as rigid or universally applicable as cultural narratives suggest. Many women successfully conceive in their mid to late 30s and early 40s, especially with healthy baseline fertility like yours. This medical perspective, combined with evolving personal priorities, allowed me to release the specific fertility timeline that had felt so urgently interrupted by the betrayal. Having children remained an important life goal, but one that could develop organically within future circumstances rather than according to previously established deadlines. Social connections underwent similar recalibration during this period. Some friendships that had been maintained primarily through couple dynamics naturally attenuated. Others deepened through the authentic support exchanged during crisis. New relationships emerged through professional networks, interest-based communities, and unexpected intersections facilitated by my changing life patterns. 7 months after discovery, I made an offer on a condominium in a neighborhood I had researched thoroughly, close enough to maintain important local connections, but sufficiently removed to represent genuine relocation rather than minor adjustment. The property reflected my independently established priorities: architectural character, proximity to parks and cultural institutions, suitable space for both working from home and eventually entertaining. The purchasing process proceeded smoothly, unencumbered by negotiated compromises or relationship tensions. Each decision, from financing structures to renovation plans, reflected solely my preferences and priorities. While occasionally daunting, this complete autonomy provided confirmation of my capacity for independent functioning across all life domains. 8 months after discovery, a colleague introduced me to her brother Michael during a casual dinner gathering. The connection was neither romantic nor particularly significant, simply pleasant conversation between compatible individuals in a group setting. Yet the interaction carried outsized importance in my recovery journey. It represented the first time I had engaged with potential romantic interest, without automatic comparison to my marriage or hypervigilance about deception. We exchanged contact information with casual openness to future interaction without explicit dating intentions. The absence of pressure or expectation allowed genuine curiosity to emerge without activation of trauma responses. While not a dramatic development, this natural social engagement demonstrated healing integration rather than continuing psychological disruption. When Michael texted the following week suggesting coffee, I experienced normal first date nervousness rather than betrayal-specific anxiety. Our conversation flowed easily between professional interests, cultural references, and personal backgrounds without triggered associations to past relationship dynamics. Though it remained unclear whether romantic potential existed between us, the interaction itself represented significant recovery progress. 9 months after discovery, I moved into my new condominium, a space reflecting careful consideration of how I wanted to live, rather than reactive opposition to previous arrangements. The decoration and organization incorporated elements of continuity from my pre-marriage identity, selective aspects of my married life that remained meaningful independent of the relationship, and newly discovered preferences emerging from current circumstances. Friends and family gathered for a housewarming celebration that felt genuinely joyful rather than performatively positive. The conversations, connections, and collective energy reflected authentic engagement with present reality rather than careful navigation around recent trauma. Multiple guests commented independently on my visible relaxation and natural animation compared to earlier interactions. "You seem like yourself again," my mother observed quietly during a private moment, but also, more defined somehow, more distinctly Eliza. Her observation captured something essential about the recovery process. Not a return to previous identity, but evolution toward more integrated selfhood, incorporating lessons from painful experience without being defined by it. The betrayal had shattered certain foundational assumptions about my life, but the reconstruction wasn't merely reassembling broken pieces. It was thoughtful creation of new understanding built from both previous knowledge and recent insights. 10 months after discovery, I encountered Daniel unexpectedly at a professional event, our first unplanned meeting since the initial separation. The momentary shock quickly resolved into composed acknowledgement rather than emotional disruption. We exchanged brief, civil greetings before returning to separate conversations with respective colleagues. What struck me most profoundly about this encounter was its relative insignificance. The man who had occupied central positioning in both my daily life and psychological landscape for 7 years now registered as a familiar but increasingly peripheral figure. The sight of him triggered recognition without activating acute distress or disorientation. Later that evening, processing the interaction with my therapist, I identified this diminished emotional impact as perhaps the most meaningful marker of recovery thus far. He's becoming increasingly contextualized, I explained, searching for precise language. Still significant in my history, but no longer dominating my present experience or defining my future expectations. That's the integration we've been working toward, she confirmed. Not erasure of the experience or its impact, but appropriate contextualization within your broader life narrative. This perspective helped me recognize similar integration occurring across multiple domains: professional identity, social connections, daily functioning, and potential future relationships. The betrayal remained a significant life event that had fundamentally altered my trajectory, but it was increasingly positioned as a chapter within my story rather than the defining narrative lens through which all experience was filtered. 11 months after discovery, I joined a small group traveling to Barcelona for a friend's milestone birthday celebration. The decision to visit the city that had featured so prominently in the betrayal discovery represented deliberate reclamation rather than avoidance. The destination that had initially symbolized relationship deception would be experienced authentically through genuine connection with friends who had provided crucial support throughout my recovery process. Walking through the architectural wonders I had researched years earlier for a trip with Daniel, I experienced complex emotional layers, echoes of old pain alongside appreciation for present beauty, recognition of what had been lost alongside gratitude for what had been gained through the difficult journey of the past year. Standing before the Sagrada Familia, I remembered the photo of Daniel and Melissa I had discovered in that first shocking moment, their arms around each other in this exact location where I now stood with supportive friends. The juxtaposition might have been devastatingly painful months earlier. Now it generated thoughtful reflection on the unpredictable nature of life trajectories and the capacity for growth through circumstances we would never willingly choose. I had planned to see this with him for years, I told my friend Leah as we gazed up at the spectacular facade. Now I'm here with you instead. Different journey, different companions, but still experiencing its beauty. Maybe even experiencing it more authentically, she suggested, without the shadow of deception underneath. Her observation resonated deeply, not as simplistic silver lining, but as recognition of the qualitative difference between experiences contaminated by hidden betrayal versus those built on genuine connection. The life I had believed I was living with Daniel had been partially illusory, regardless of my authentic investment in it. The current moment, though not what I had envisioned for myself a year earlier, held the substantive reality that comes from alignment between appearance and actuality. 1 year after discovering those fateful Barcelona photos, I sat in my therapist's office for what we had designated as our final regular session. The anniversary timing was intentional, a symbolic bookending of intensive therapeutic support for the acute and intermediate phases of recovery. "How are you marking this anniversary?" she asked as we settled into the familiar seating arrangement that had contained so many difficult conversations over the previous 12 months. "I'm having dinner with the friends who were most present during the crisis period," I explained, "not to commemorate the betrayal itself, but to acknowledge how far I've come since then and express gratitude for their roles in that journey." That seems appropriately balanced, she observed, acknowledging the significance of the date without allowing it to remain a perpetually traumatic marker. This balance characterized my overall recovery status: recognition of profound impact without continuing re-traumatization, integration of painful experience without defining identity through it, measured trust rather than either naive openness or paranoid hypervigilance. The changes catalyzed by betrayal discovery had ranged from immediately evident external adjustments to subtle internal recalibrations. The most obvious transformations appeared in concrete life circumstances: new home, expanded professional responsibilities, reconfigured social connections, altered future planning. The most significant evolution, however, had occurred in my relationship with trust, both of others and myself. I've been reflecting on what healthy trust looks like now, I shared, not returning to pre-betrayal naivety, but not remaining trapped in post-trauma suspicion either. What have you concluded? My therapist prompted. That trust isn't an absolute state, but an ongoing assessment. It's built through accumulated evidence of consistency between words and actions. It requires both emotional openness and cognitive awareness. And most importantly, trusting others starts with trusting my own perceptions and intuitions. This recalibrated understanding had developed gradually through practical applications rather than abstract theorizing. The casual dating experiences I had cautiously engaged in over recent months provided opportunities to practice discernment without defaulting to either automatic trust or reflexive suspicion. Professional collaborations demonstrated capacity for appropriate vulnerability within clearly established boundaries. Deepened friendships illustrated the possibility of meaningful connection without complete merged identity. The betrayal revealed that trust without verification can leave us vulnerable to manipulation, I continued, but verification without fundamental trust makes meaningful connection impossible. Finding that balance individually rather than through externally imposed rules seems crucial. That's sophisticated integration, my therapist affirmed. Not splitting into absolutist positions, but holding the complexity of human relationship dynamics and your own particular needs within them. This capacity for nuanced assessment extended beyond trust considerations to broader life evaluations. The pain of betrayal had initially created rigid categories of interpretation, casting the entire marriage as either completely authentic or entirely fraudulent, viewing Daniel as either beloved partner or malicious deceiver, perceiving my own role as either blameless victim or oblivious enabler. With time and therapeutic support, these absolutist framings had evolved toward more complex understanding. The marriage had contained elements of both genuine connection and fundamental deception. Daniel had been simultaneously the partner who supported me through professional challenges and the husband who systematically betrayed my trust. My own role encompassed both reasonable trust in a life partner and missed opportunities for deeper questioning when subtle inconsistencies emerged. This multidimensional perspective didn't excuse the betrayal or minimize its impact. Rather, it allowed more complete processing by acknowledging the complex reality rather than flattening experience into simplified narratives that inevitably left important elements unaddressed. I'm not grateful for the betrayal, I clarified during our final session, but I can recognize how navigating its aftermath has contributed to my development in ways that might not have occurred otherwise. That's different from toxic positivity or silver lining thinking, my therapist noted. You're not minimizing the legitimate harm or suggesting it was somehow meant to be for your growth. You're simply acknowledging that your response to adversity has included meaningful evolution alongside painful disruption. This framing helped resolve what had initially felt like contradictory truths: that the betrayal had been genuinely traumatic while the recovery process had generated valuable insights and capabilities. Both realities could exist simultaneously without requiring reconciliation into a single simplified narrative. As our final regular session concluded, we established parameters for potential future check-ins, available but not scheduled, maintaining the therapeutic connection without continuing dependency. This transition symbolized confidence in my established recovery and ongoing growth capacity, without suggesting complete resolution of all betrayal-related impacts. Recovery from relational trauma isn't about erasing the experience or its effects, my therapist emphasized as we prepared to part. It's about integration that allows forward movement without either denial or perpetual re-traumatization. By that standard, you've achieved remarkable progress. The anniversary dinner that evening provided tangible evidence of this integration. Gathered around a table with friends who had witnessed the entire evolution from initial devastation to current stability, I experienced natural emotional flow that included moments of sadness alongside genuine joy, serious reflection alongside spontaneous laughter. A year ago, I couldn't imagine ever feeling normal again, I acknowledged during a toast. The fact that I'm sitting here now, genuinely present and engaged rather than just performing functionality, demonstrates resilience I didn't know I possessed. Much of that comes from the support you all provided when I needed it most. The conversations that followed moved fluidly between acknowledgement of the difficult journey and engagement with current circumstances, professional developments, emerging relationships, future aspirations that had evolved through but were not limited by the betrayal experience. 14 months after discovery, I encountered Melissa unexpectedly at an industry networking event. We acknowledged each other with restrained but genuine civility, briefly exchanging current professional updates before returning to respective colleague groups. The interaction caused mild emotional activation, but no significant distress, another data point confirming progressive integration rather than continuing acute trauma response. The following week, I received a job offer from a company I had long admired, a senior position representing significant advancement beyond my current role, with compensation reflecting my established expertise and expanded responsibilities. The opportunity had developed through connections made during my international assignment, representing positive downstream effects from decisions made during crisis recovery. After appropriate consideration and negotiation, I accepted the position, another step forward that incorporated lessons from betrayal without being defined by that experience. The role's requirements would challenge capabilities developed through navigating relationship trauma while engaging professional skills entirely independent of that personal history. 16 months after discovery, I began a relationship with someone I had met through a professional mentoring program. The connection developed gradually and authentically, with mutual disclosure appropriate to evolving intimacy rather than premature vulnerability or withholding defense. When I eventually shared the betrayal experience, he responded with balanced empathy, neither dismissing its significance nor treating me as permanently damaged by it. "That sounds incredibly painful," he acknowledged, "and also like something you've processed with remarkable thoughtfulness." This dual recognition of both the legitimate wound and the substantial healing epitomized the balanced perspective I had worked to achieve internally and now encountered reflected back through external interaction. The relationship progression incorporated lessons from betrayal recovery without being overshadowed by past experience. I practiced discernment without hypervigilance, appropriate vulnerability without naive trust, explicit communication without anxious demand for constant reassurance. These balanced approaches represented integration of painful lessons without continuing trauma responses. 18 months after discovery, I found myself standing in my office at the new company, arranging personal items in a space that represented professional advancement partially catalyzed by life disruption I would never have chosen. A colleague commented on a small framed quote on my bookshelf, words from Maya Angelou that had become particularly meaningful during recovery. "You may not control all the events that happen to you, but you can decide not to be reduced by them." That resonates with me deeply, I explained without elaborating on specific circumstances. Life rarely follows our carefully constructed plans, but how we respond to those disruptions shapes who we become. The selective disclosure represented another aspect of integration, acknowledging significant impact without anchoring identity in traumatic experience, sharing meaningful insights without inappropriate vulnerability in professional contexts. The betrayal had become part of my history without dominating my self-concept or defining my primary narrative. 2 years after discovery, I participated in a panel discussion for a women's professional development conference, addressing career resilience during personal disruption. Without sharing inappropriate details, I referenced my experience navigating major life recalibration alongside professional advancement. Sometimes the path we carefully plan disappears entirely, I noted during the discussion. The question becomes not how to return to the original route, but how to create a new journey that incorporates what we've learned through unexpected challenge. A young woman approached me afterward, sharing that she was struggling with major personal disruption while trying to maintain professional momentum. Without presuming equivalent circumstances, I offered the perspective that had proved most valuable in my own experience. Integration rather than compartmentalization is key. The personal and professional aren't separate realms. They're aspects of the same life journey, constantly informing each other. The challenge is finding the balance between appropriate boundaries and artificial division. The ability to transform painful experience into meaningful insight for others represented a form of post-traumatic growth that transcended individual recovery. The betrayal remained objectively negative, an experience I would never have chosen and would never wish on anyone else. Yet the navigation of its aftermath had generated wisdom and resilience that now benefited both my individual development and my capacity to support others facing similar challenges. This evolution from traumatized victim to reflective integrator to supportive mentor illustrated the complete arc of recovery, not erasing the betrayal or minimizing its impact, but transforming its meaning from devastating endpoint to significant chapter within a continuing life story. The woman who had curled up on her sofa that Sunday afternoon to organize vacation photos, secure in her understanding of her marriage and future trajectory, no longer existed. The discovery that followed had irrevocably altered both external circumstances and internal landscape. Yet the woman who emerged through that shattering had developed capacities for resilience, discernment, and authentic connection that might otherwise have remained dormant. A chance algorithm suggesting similar images had revealed devastating truth that collapsed my carefully constructed life. But in that collapse, foundation was laid for rebuilding with greater awareness, intention, and authenticity. The technological glitch that exposed betrayal had initiated painful but ultimately transformative recalibration of how I understood relationship, trust, and my own capacity for navigating life's most challenging disruptions. The photos themselves, those images of Barcelona that had triggered the discovery, no longer held emotional charge. They had been archived rather than deleted, acknowledged as significant historical artifacts rather than continuing sources of re-traumatization. Like the betrayal they documented, they had been integrated into broader life narrative without being granted power to define present experience or future expectations. And perhaps that represented the most meaningful measure of recovery, not absence of impact, but appropriate contextualization of even the most painful experiences within the continuing, evolving story of a life still being written, one authentic chapter at a time. TLDR, while organizing our Costa Rica vacation photos, Google's algorithm showed me similar images from my husband's business trip to Barcelona, except they revealed he was actually there with his assistant on a romantic getaway. Investigating further, I discovered their affair had been going on for over 7 months, including during our anniversary trip. After confronting him and learning he had been manipulating both of us with different stories, I rebuilt my life with greater authenticity, eventually finding professional advancement and renewed capacity for genuine connection. Edit 1. So many have asked if Daniel and Melissa stayed together. They didn't. According to Mutual Connections, their relationship imploded about 3 months after the discovery, when she caught him in a new deception. The foundation of lies that supported our marriage apparently extended to his affair as well. Edit 2. For those suggesting I should have checked his phone earlier or noticed warning signs, trust isn't the absence of verification, but the assumption of fundamental good intentions. I wasn't ignoring red flags. He was deliberately creating a reality where there weren't any obvious ones to see. That's the insidious nature of sophisticated deception. Update. 6 months later. Life continues to evolve in unexpected ways. I've settled into my senior role at the new company and recently received a significant industry award for a campaign I directed. The relationship I mentioned has developed into something genuinely meaningful, built on transparency, mutual respect, and the shared understanding that trust is an ongoing practice rather than a fixed state. We're taking things at a measured pace, both bringing lessons from past experiences into building something authentic together. I've maintained the friendships that strengthened during my recovery period, creating a support network that extends beyond romantic partnership. The most surprising development? I'm returning to Barcelona next month for a business conference, reclaiming the city as part of my professional journey rather than a symbol of betrayal. Sometimes healing looks like revisiting painful places with new purpose and perspective. Thank you all for your support during what was truly the darkest period of my life. Your comments helped me remember I wasn't alone in experiencing this kind of betrayal and recovery.